Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany of BrittanyJJones.com. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. I hope that you will like what you see and subscribe below for more. In today's video, we are going to be sewing. We're going to be sewing along to the new McCall's pattern M8509, and I'm going to be following along with View B on this video. For fabric, I made this using a white linen, and for size reference, I made the size 20. Go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces and your fabric. You will need some lining and a little bit of interfacing. Go ahead and cut everything out, transfer your markings, and let's start sewing. Again, we're going to be sewing along with the new McCall's M8509, and we're going to be following along with View B in this video. For fabric, I am using this white linen for this garment. To begin, let's go ahead and start working with pattern piece number 2 and 3. And with right sides facing, we are going to stitch them together, matching up the double notches. So again, make sure that you place the fabric right sides facing and match up the double notches. Once you have it all pinned, then we can go ahead and stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and pin the other one the same way, and let's stitch it now. Now that we have it stitched, you want to go ahead and press your seam open flat like I've done here. I did also trim down my seam a little bit to maybe about 1/4 of an inch, so you can trim it before you press. Next, we can move on with pattern piece number 1, and matching up our single notches, you want to match it up right sides facing, match up your single notches, and then you can start to pin in place. I know it's hard to see, but my pattern pieces are interfaced, so make sure that you have interfaced all the appropriate pieces that are listed out in the pattern. Once everything is interfaced, go ahead and start pinning it in place like I'm doing here, making sure that you match up those single notches. Once it's matched up, let's stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have it stitched, you can go ahead and trim down your seam. I'm trimming mine down to about 1/4 of an inch, and then you want to go ahead and press your seam open flat. While pressing, I am using my pressing hand because I do want to keep the curve that's in the fabric. You don't want to press it flat once it has a curve in it, like it's going over the bust. So you want to keep that natural curve that it's creating. So again, I'm using my pressing hand while I am pressing. Next, we are going to take our pattern pieces, and with right sides facing, we are going to stitch the bodice together at the center front between the large and small dot. So first, go ahead and pin it together, again, right sides facing, right along the center front, and we're going to stitch between the small and large dot. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now that you have it stitched, you want to go ahead and press your seam open flat like I've done here. And next we can go ahead and grab our back bodice piece, which is pattern piece number 4. You should have cut 2 out of fabric, 2 out of interfacing, and 2 for lining. I am taking the piece that is interfaced, so make sure that you are using your interfaced back piece. And again, with right sides facing, we're going to match up our single notch, and we are going to pin that in place. So again, with right sides facing, match up your notches and pin in place. We are pinning the back onto the front along the side seam. You want to pin both side seams the same way, and now we can stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have it stitched, go ahead and trim down your seam. I'm trimming mine down to about 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to go ahead and press it open flat. Once you have them pressed open flat, now we can start to work on the shoulder strap, which is pattern piece number 5. And with right sides together, you're going to fold them in half along the lengthwise, and we're going to stitch down the long edge and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Let's go ahead and stitch it now. Now that we have it stitched, you want to go ahead and trim down your seam. And then you want to take a loop turner or whatever tool that you prefer to use and go ahead and flip your straps right side out. I had a little bit of a struggle flipping mine because my fabric is thick, but just take your time, flip yours right side out, and then once they're out, go ahead and give them a good press. And then we can go ahead and pin them onto the top of the bodice. So for the ends that are squared across, you want to match those up to the front bodice, and to the ends that have an angle, those go to the back. You want to match everything up with the circles that are on the strap as well as the circles that's on the bodice, then we can baste them in place. Once you have them basted, you want to go ahead and try them on. As you can see, I had to adjust mine a little bit after I tried it on. But once you're happy with your straps and the way that they fit, after you try them on, go ahead and trim them down. Now we can start to work on the front. You need pattern piece number 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I'm just going to start pinning with 7 and 8 first, just to keep things kind of organized. So beginning with pattern piece number 7, I am going to take pattern piece number 8. We're going to match up the single notches and we're going to pin in place. So again, make sure that you are matching up the single notches that are on pattern piece number 7 and 8, and then we're going to pin those in place. If your fabric is like mine and it's hard to tell the right and wrong side, you may need to put a little mark on the wrong side of the fabric. I put little X's on mine just to indicate the wrong side. But once you have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And again, this is pattern piece number 7 and 8. Okay, and now that we have it sewn, you want to go ahead and finish off your seams and give them a press. Next, we're going to grab pattern piece number 9 and we are going to pin pattern piece number 9 to pattern piece number 8. Make sure that you match up your double notches and go ahead and pin in place, making sure that you have your fabric right sides facing. After you have it pinned, you want to go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then after you have it sewn, you can finish off your seams and press them to one side, or you can press them open if you like. Now that we have pattern piece number 9 sewn on, we've finished the seam and we've pressed it. Now we can grab pattern piece number 10 and we're going to do the exact same thing. You want to grab pattern piece number 10, you want to match up your double notches onto pattern piece number 9 and stitch it in place the same way that we did for the other pattern pieces. Once you have it all sewn, this is how your front should be looking. I have all of the pattern pieces sewn on. You want to go ahead and finish off your seams and give them a press. And now let's start to work on the back. For the back, you need pattern piece 11, 12, and 13. You're going to stitch 12 onto 11, 13 onto 12, and 14 onto 13, the same exact way that we did for the front. So make sure that you put your pattern pieces together, matching up those notches. And again, the same exact way that we did for the front, you want to do for the back, sewing pattern piece number 12 to 11, 13 to 12, and 14 to 13, matching up your notches. Once you have it sewn, it should look like this. I have both of my back pieces together, and now we can go ahead and put our fronts to the back along the side seams, and we can pin those in place, matching up our notches. And again, with right sides facing, go ahead and pin your side seams together. Once you have your side seams pinned, we can go ahead and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have our front and back sewn together along the side seam, now we can go ahead and grab our front and back bodice. And with right sides facing, we want to go ahead and pin together, matching up our notches, our center fronts, as well as our back edges. And we want to go ahead and stitch that in place. So again, go ahead and start pinning your front bodice onto the front and to the back, matching up your notches and your centers and your seams. And let's go ahead and pin like I'm doing here. Once it's pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have it sewn, your front should be looking something like this. I have my front and back bodice sewn onto the front. I trim down my seam and then I press my seam going up toward the bodice. Now let's start to work on the lining. To begin, you want to grab pattern piece number 6 and you want to go ahead and stitch this dart area. So I'm using my hip curve ruler here because the dart has a little bit of a curve. It's not just a straight dart leg, it has curves on it. So just go ahead and transfer your dart legs and then we can go ahead and pin them together and stitch them in place. So as you can see here, I'm transferring my dart legs using my hip curve ruler. And now I'm going to go ahead and fold the fabric right sides facing, making sure that I put the pins through both dart leg. Once you have your darts pinned in place, you can go ahead and stitch it. To stitch your dart in place, you want to back stitch at the widest part when you start stitching. Stitch all the way down to the point, but once you get to the point, you want to leave long thread tails. Do not back stitch. We can just tie it in a knot to secure the dart. Now that we have our darts sewn, you want to go ahead and press them toward the center front like so. Once you have it pressed, now we want to go ahead and grab pattern piece number 4, the bodice back, and we are going to pin, matching up our notches and stitch down the side seam. So again, make sure that you have it right sides facing. Go ahead and pin it in place. After you have it pinned, you want to then go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. Once you have it sewn, you want to go ahead and press your seam open flat like I've done here. And now with right sides facing, we are going to stitch the center front of our lining pieces between our large and small dot. We're going to stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and pin and then we can stitch that in place. And then after you have it stitched on the lower edge of the lining piece, we want to press up 5/8 of an inch. And then after it's pressed up, we can trim it down to 3/8 of an inch. So first go ahead and stitch your center seam, fold up 5/8 of an inch like I've done here. I have stitched the seam and I've pressed up 5/8 of an inch. And now I'm going to grab my scissors and we can go ahead and trim this down to 3/8 of an inch. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now that we have it trimmed, we are going to take the bodice lining and lay it over the top right sides facing. And we are going to pin along the upper edge, matching up the center front, the side seams, and the symbols. Once we get to the back, you want to make sure that you stop stitching within 3 inches of the lining. You do not want to close it all the way up because we need to install the zipper. So I just measured 3 inches from the edge. That's where I'm going to begin stitching, and I'm going to stop stitching 3 inches on the other side. Again, we need to install the zipper, so make sure that you stop 3 inches before the ends. Let's stitch it now. Now that we have it stitched, we can go ahead and trim, and I'm not going to be trimming over on the side where we did not stitch. We will trim that off after we have it sewn once the zipper is installed, but go ahead and trim down your seam. After you have it trimmed down, then we can do understitching. With understitching, you want to make sure you have your seam going toward your lining, and we're going to stitch really close to the edge, catching in the seam allowance and the lining only, not the main fabric. Let's go ahead and do our understitching now. Now that you have your understitching done, you can go ahead and turn everything toward the inside and give it a good press. And now we can go ahead and install our zipper. Before installing the zipper, I did go ahead and put a little bit of interfacing where I'm going to be installing it for some additional support. To begin, you want to go ahead and open up your zipper and you want to press the tape. If you have any folds along the zipper, go ahead and press that with a cool iron. On the outside, you're going to pin the right side of the zipper tape face down along the right side. You want to make sure that you have the coils along your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's very important. The top of your zipper tape needs to be within the seam allowance and the stop at the top needs to be 3/4 of an inch down because again, we do still need to sew it. So you don't want to put the zipper stop all the way along the top. You want to make sure you have that down about 3/4 of an inch. Make sure that your coals are lining up with your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you want to go ahead and baste it in place. You can definitely baste this in place by hand, which I do recommend, or you can baste in place by machine. There are many different ways on how to install an invisible zipper. So if you are not sure, I do have some links down in the description box that you can follow to help you get your invisible zipper installed. You do want to put on a zipper presser foot if you have one, or if you have an invisible zipper foot, you can put that one on. I'm going to be using that, and as you can see on the back of it, it has a little groove for the zipper coils to slide into. It helps and it makes installing invisible zippers really easy. Once you have that portion of the zipper installed, you're going to repeat those same steps to the other side. The key with this side though is to make sure that you have it matched up right along your seam where your bodice and your skirt is attached. You want to make sure that that seam is matched up with your zipper. And as you can see right here, I'm just pinning, and I didn't think about it, but when it dawned on me, I had to go back and transfer a little marking so I know where I need to match up my zipper, so I'm matching up that seam. So definitely keep that in mind so that you have a nice clean seam and they match up in the back along the zipper. So again, you want to pin your zipper tape along the left side opening, making sure that you have the zipper coils right on your 5/8 of an inch seam line. If you're not quite sure where that is, you can transfer your 5/8 of an inch seam line so that your zipper teeth are laying right on that. And then you can go ahead and hand baste your zipper's tape in place. Again, I recommend basting it in place, especially if you don't have much experience with invisible zippers. Baste it in place first, and then go ahead and do your permanent stitch. Once you have the zipper installed, you want to go ahead and do a quick check to make sure that it is nice and invisible and clean the way you would like it. So here I'm just zipping up the zipper, and I'm really happy with how everything meets up right along that seam. I do kind of feel like I had a little bit of extra tape showing there, so I am going to go back and sew it a little bit closer just so I'm not getting any zipper tape, that's kind of showing right there. I want it to be really nice and clean. But other than that, I really like the way the zipper looks. So after I go in and make that a little bit more cleaner, we can move on to the next step. Next, we're going to close up the remaining of our center back seam. So we're going to pin it right sides together, pin the remaining of your seam, and we're going to move our needle all the way to the left. Once you have it moved to the left, we're going to start stitching where we left off stitching at, but you want to go up 1/4 of an inch from where you last stopped stitching. And again, with your needle all the way to the left, begin stitching there and stitch all the way down to the end of your seam. Once you have that done, if you have a long zipper like I have, you can go ahead and create a new zipper stop and then trim off the excess. I am going to create a new zipper stop and trim mine off now. Once you have your new zipper stop, again, this is if your zipper was long like mine was. If it was the right length, you probably did not have to shorten it. Once you have it shortened, you can go ahead and secure your zipper tape to your seam allowance. If you want to make sure that it's not moving around in your garment, you can go ahead and just stitch down along the zipper tape only on the seam allowance. You don't want it to go through the right side of your fabric. So this is what the remaining of my seam looks like. Now we can move on to the next step, and that is with closing up our lining. So now we can go ahead and fold our lining back over. Again, this is onto the right side of the garment, and we need to stitch the opening close along the top, and then we also want to stitch down along the zipper tape. So again, go ahead and start pinning it in place. You can base this in place just like you basted the zipper in place if you'd like. I'm just going to go ahead and put pins in mine. Again, I have the lining right sides facing with the garment over the zipper, and I'm just pinning it in place to close up that top opening that we left, and also to stitch it along the zipper tape. We're going to be stitching along the zipper tape at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to start stitching where we left off to close up the top. Let's go ahead and do our stitching now. Again, stitch along the top and then pivot and stitch down the zipper tape to close up our lining. Once you have it sewn, this is what yours should start to look like now. And so again, I have stitched the remaining opening along the back bodice close, and I have stitched down along the zipper tape. You can go ahead and do understitching as far as you can go now if you'd like to. The next thing for us to do is to do some slip stitching. You want to slip stitch your lining close along the inside. I'm going to slip stitch mine off camera, but again, you do want to go ahead and slip stitch your lining close. After you have the slip stitching done, the last thing for us to do is our hem. Our hem is a 5/8 of an inch narrow hem that we're going to be doing. You may have to ease in some fullness because this is a full circle skirt. As you can see, I've gone ahead and pressed my hem up. And so now I'm just going to go ahead and stitch close to the fold to create the hem. Now that you have your hem sewn in place, you want to go ahead and give it a really good press. Once you have it pressed, again, go back. If you did not do your slip stitch, you want to go ahead and do yours. I finished mine off here, and then you are all done with your top. Again, we made view B on McCall's 8509. Well, that is all for this sew along, and I really do hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down for me below. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you know when the next video is live, and I will see you all then. Blessings, everyone. Bye.